What's bubbling, magical people? Welcome back to the Witching Hour with Miss Merlin, where we like to talk about all things witchy and magical. Your one-stop source for everything spellcasting, ascension, healing, tarot, mediumship, psychic gifts, deities, plant medicine, healing, nature, and much, much more. I'm Kimmy, aka Miss Merlin, High Priestess and Shamaness, medicine woman, psychic medium, vulva, and witch extraordinaire. So let's jump on in. Today we are talking about Celtic pantheon and how the Celtic pantheon kind of relates a little bit to the Nordic pantheon. So now that I've taught you guys a little bit about the Nordic pantheon, we're going to move a little bit and go into the Celtic pantheon. Okay, so we're going to talk first about Nordic versus Celtic. Now, I'm going to put visuals, some pictures, because I don't have video for YouTube yet. Sorry, guys, still working on it. I will be putting that on my social media, okay? I will list all of that below in my link tree. It's at @Miss Merlin on all platforms. I am most active on Instagram and TikTok. Okay, so again, we're going to talk Nordic versus Celtic. And you're going to see, guys, as we go through these different pantheons of different gods and goddesses, a lot of the stories are similar. A lot of the gods and goddesses are similar. And why do you think that is? In all these pagan traditions, right? Because these stories kind of traveled and then they got adopted by people who added their own kind of cultural twist to things. Because all these stories were written by humans. We have to keep that in mind. All right, so let's get into it. So the Nordic area is Denmark, Sweden, Norway, up into Iceland. Okay, Celtic, large area of Central and Northern Europe. Okay, most Irish, what we find for the information here is limited in the text, okay? It's mostly Irish sagas that we get the information from. And then we have Germanic. Germanic is very, very similar to Nordic, and it's often grouped together. And again, there is not a whole lot of source material. So there is only like a 5% estimate of what we actually know, okay? And this pertaining more to Celtic stuff, so predominantly Irish stuff is what we have. Okay, so there's not a lot that goes back before that. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the similarities and the differences with the pantheon. Okay, so as we know, the Allfather in Norse paganism is Odin. And in the Celtic pantheon, their essential Allfather is the Dagda. So the similarities there, if you look up pictures of them, and like I said, I will be putting visuals to go along with what we're talking about today on my social media. So if you want to check that out, go and follow me there. So when you would see them, they're both depicted as bearded men, cloaked, looking very magical. If you notice too, all these like Allfather gods kind of look also like Merlin too, like the cloak, wizard, magical. All right, so they were both known as wandering bearded men. They were magical, had many children with many different women, associated with many different stories and myths. They're both associated with magic, of course, Odin being associated with runes and Seder, and the Dagda being associated with druidry. But they're both also gods of war. So that is, however, where a lot of the similarities end. And their tales are somewhat similar, and then some of them are quite different as you go along and read some of the myths. Now, Freya, right? we're going to compare her a little bit to the Morrigan. So the similarities, the Morrigan is a goddess of war and death. She's typically considered very dark. She's a very dark deity, very dark feminine energy. Heavy deity to work with sometimes. I think that's a matter of opinion. But she's also associated with witchcraft, magic. And then we have also Frey. And she's the goddess of war. And looking over the dead. So also associated with birds. Similar to the Morrigan, who is always associated with crows. Sorry, I was gonna say cravens, putting ravens and crows together. So in one of those mornings, kids. All right. So anyways, association with birds, because the Morrigan, it can also shapeshift into the form of the crow or the raven. Also hawks. Friday associated with Freya, magic and witchcraft. But many people also worship Frey on Fridays. So the Celts have Gobnu, the sacred smithers, and the Norse have the cosmic dwarves, who we've talked about a little bit in some of the stories we've covered. They were the ones who crafted Freya's necklace, apparently, and other stories that we've already talked about involving the dwarves. So, Njord and the giants rule over water in Norse mythology. Okay, Njord being essentially the water god. Okay, and then the giants, who we haven't really talked about a whole lot, but that's okay. And then Thor, also associated with storms and controlling the weather. So the Celts have Manannan Mac, the god of the sea, with the similar kind of connection to the sea. And something that seems to ring true for all the pantheons is that the gods and goddesses are not just in charge of one thing. They have this duality to them. They can be the god of war, but also be associated to creativity and poetry, or love and fertility, but also, death and destruction or chaos. So there's always a duality to them, and they're always in charge of more than one job, essentially. Okay, and then in the Celtic pantheon, we of course have Brigid or Brigid, and she's the primary deity of Ireland. She's also known as Saint Brigid, and she still has a holy day to this day, and she's the primary ruler over the celebration of Imbolc, which is January 31st, February 1st, okay? Depending on who you ask. And then we have Frigg, the mother goddess in Norse mythology, all right, who is also, who I talked about this a little bit. Frigg and Freya kind of combine in a lot of these stories, and depending on who you ask, same person, okay? But again, depending on who you ask, different goddess entirely. So, it just depends on where you go for your research. So Frigg being the mother goddess, wife of Odin in Norse mythology, in some sagas, she is really, really intelligent, and she's quite cheeky and a little manipulative with Odin, if you will. But both goddesses are very complex. So the deities have a lot of similarities, but their stories and energies can be quite different. All right? So let's now talk about some sacred sites. Now, as you go through a lot of the sacred sites, you have to know that when Christianity, Catholicism swept across everywhere, it canceled everything out. Okay, that's another reason why a lot of the literature is lost, or it's been changed, or like I said, the stories were changed to make the deities discredited, if you will. All right. So we have Arthur's Seat, which is in Edinburgh, and it has Catholic lore, but its roots and why it's sacred are very much pagan. So again, Christian people, Catholic people came in, took it over. Now, if I pronounce anything incorrectly, I promise you I'm trying, and I absolutely mean no disrespect at all, okay? So, Karen Papo, I think it is. Karen Papo? I'm not sure. I'm so sorry. Anyways, yeah, I think it's pronounced like Karen Papo. All right, so Scotland stone circles. It was also taken over by Christians who even had the audacity to be buried there. So this was like a stone circle that was there probably from the druids. And then again, when patriarchy and organized religion swept across everything, they took it over and made it a sacred site for themselves. And then, like I said, even had the audacity to be buried there. Then we have Persephone's temple, which is also a smaller stone circle, and a grave, which looks very pagan. And it's just down the road from Karen Popple. And then there are Livingston Stones, which is west of Edinburgh. It's an ancient stone circle. And most of these, like I said, were sacred to the druids, the magical people. The problem with the druids, though, and like I mentioned, a lot of sacred texts were destroyed, but the druids also didn't write anything down because they didn't want it taken, you know. So all their rituals, everything like that was done orally through memory. They were the spiritual leaders of the society. They were the political leaders also, and military leaders. They were very, very respected. One of the main reasons why the Romans sought to destroy them and killed them all off with a lot of the ancient knowledge, like I mentioned. Mostly for Celtic paganism. That's why there's not a lot of texts surrounding that. And then, like I said, the Druids didn't write anything down, so that becomes very problematic. The Germanic and Nordic pagans' way of worship was in direct defiance of the patriarchy because they revered women. It was women who spoke prophecy, practiced divination, connected directly to the gods and goddesses. They were displayed by the Norns. So the Norns in Nordic paganism, the Norns are the weavers of fate, and they are women. All right, they're vulva. All right, we did discuss already what vulva are. Okay, Nordic witches, seeresses. All right, it's not that men were not seers and magical, but this was important because they said women were revered in paganism. They were equals. Patriarchy came in and was like, no, we can't have this. So, again, for Nordic sacred sites, the only one we kind of still know of is Uppsala. And some of it is still intact. It was a sacred temple ground. It's in Sweden. And many, 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 many different families and clans and people from different regions around that area would travel to Uppsala every 9 years, and they would have rituals and celebrations, and it was a really, really beautiful thing. And like I said, some of that sacred ground is still there to this day. So somewhere that is on my bucket list. It's like number 2. I'm going to go there. I will make it happen. All right. So, the afterlife, very different belief system. The Celts believed in reincarnation, or like a trading system to go to another world. Something comes, something goes. And Nordic, as we discussed, was in the different realms, the halls of the gods, right? You wanted to get to Valhalla. You wanted to die in bravery, in battle, and be chosen by the Valkyries to be taken to Valhalla. But we have also discussed that Freya also has a hall, Folkrangir. And it's unclear how to really get in there. But it is said, mothers who died in childbirth, sometimes warriors who didn't die in battle and just kind of died in old age or from a plague, something like that. There's, like I said, there's a lot of varying texts, and a lot of it was destroyed. So it depends on where you look. But all of the major gods in the Nordic pantheon have halls. Like Thor has a hall. So it's unclear, like I said, how you were to get into those halls. But that's what you wanted to do. And then the underworld, I guess, for souls that just didn't count, was Helheim, right? Ruled by Hel. And the Nordic people did burial mounds. So did the Celts. But a lot of the Nordic people did water fire burials, mostly, right? They would, especially for prominent figures, they would have a special Viking boat created, and it would be filled with offerings. If it was a person of high stature, like an earl or a king, queen, something like that, they would also have a slave laid with them that was going to join them in the afterlife. And that person often volunteered, and it was an honor. So it wasn't just like, hey, you're going to die today with this person. No, it was like they chose it. It was an honor. So in some of these burial mounds that have been found for Nordic and Celts alike, it's much like the Egyptian tombs. There's treasures in there, there's markings, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm just going to say right now, leave it alone. If you find it, don't touch it. Seriously, don't. But both of them, both aspects of paganism is really about nature, working with the balance of it, the cycles. That's what the meaning of pagan is basically just not organized religion. They want to call us heathens? Okay. Happy to be one. Proud to be a heathen. I actually have it written in runes like a bumper sticker on my car. Anyways, paganism is just getting back in tune with Mother Earth, celebrating the Sabbaths, the seasons. All right. So we're going to talk about the druids a little bit more. So oak trees were very sacred to them. They followed a lot of omens and signs. Like I said, they didn't write stuff down, so a lot of the information is very, very sparse. The rituals were the same basic structure. And the same basic structure across all branches of paganism, really. It's who are you working with? Give the offering to that deity or deities. Then there would be some chanting or incantation, exchange of energy, gifts, more offerings, things like that. Okay. And then some sort of close out to the ritual. And then we have talking about the Sabbaths. The Sabbaths are more on the Wiccan wheel. We do know for sure that Norse paganism, Yule, is celebrated in midsummer, June 21st. Okay, so Lammas. Midsummer is the most popular celebration still to this day in those areas. Dancing, fires, good food, gathering. Ostara, Easter, came from Germanic paganism. No, it's not Christian. No, it's not Catholic. The German goddess of spring, Ostara. Not much text on this either. Okay, so that's the celebration of her, Ostara. Okay, so for the Celts, they celebrate a lot of the fire festivals on the witch's wheel. Okay, so as I said, Imbolc being sacred to Brigid, which is January 31st, February 1st. And then we have Beltane, which is April 31st, May 1st, fire festival. Then Lunasa, August 1st. Samhain, Halloween, October 31st. Okay, and it's not the Halloween as we know it. There are more text on this. And these were celebrated for many, many years after paganism was wiped out. The most popular being Beltane. So the traditions of that still go on to this day. The maypoles, the flower crowns, big bonfires celebrating. It's very sensual energy as well because it's that spring, you know. Yeah, so it was still really popular until the 50s. It took a little break and it has regained popularity again recently. So the witch's wheel is not quite accurate date-wise, but most modern practices use it. And we know, though, for sure that all factions celebrated the solstices and the equinoxes. Seasonal offerings would have been common across all factions. Gatherings celebrating the season, making offerings to certain deities, whatever ones were associated with the season or whatever they were celebrating or asking for. All of them unique, fractured, and really beautiful. So let's talk about the Celtic creation story. So, from the void, from nothingness, two forces come together. Danu, the flowing mother, the essence of life itself, feminine energy, and Bele, fiery father, controlled burn, steady, purposeful. Together, they were the partners of creation. From their connection came light to fill the darkness, motion to shatter the stillness, melody to calm the silence, energy to give life a place to grow. Their union created balance itself. They took the empty void and expanse it into vast beauty and something with purpose. Together, they sculpted the essence of existence into something tangible. The land began to take shape, and amidst the mountains and rivers, a presence began to emerge. It was Ariu, the spirit of Ireland. She was incredibly striking. With emerald eyes like the land, the grounds became fertile to her touch. This was the land's guardian. Those who honored the cycles of the earth and took and gave equally back in kind thrived, and those who disrupted the balance, either by greed or sheer recklessness, faced her wrath. With the land formed and Ariu guarding it, Danu and Bele directed their energy into creating magical beings, the Tuatha De Danann, roughly translated to the folk of the goddess Danu. Born from this divine essence, we had the Dagda, as I mentioned, looking much like the Allfather Odin, was the great god, the chief deity. He embodied strength, wisdom, abundance, vitality, power. He was never without his three great treasures. He had his club, which was destruction and creation, balance of life and death, representing his dual role. One side could destroy an army, and the other could restore life to the fallen. And then he had the cauldron of plenty, which provided endless sustenance. It never ran dry. It symbolized his role of the provider and nurturer. Then he had the harp of the seasons. And this was not merely an instrument. When the strings were played, the dagda could summon the seasons. And then we have, of course, the Morrigan, the great queen. So she was like an equal to the dagda. Fate, war, sovereignty, fierce beauty, everything of her. She was a fierce beauty. Everything they write about her, every picture of her. She had overwhelming power. She's often depicted with very long raven black hair, pale skin. As I mentioned, she's a shapeshifter, frequently taking the form of the raven or crows to observe unseen. Her prophecy is often spoken riddles. She chooses leaders, ensures wars, fate, and the power to serve a purpose and align you to a higher good. And then we have Luke, the long arm, brilliance and versatility, unmatched skills in combat, very youthful, radiant, good-looking young man, purposeful movement, warfare strategy, warrior, but also music, poetry, craftsmanship. He was a natural leader, and he had the spear of victory, which never ever missed its mark. It had to be kept in a cauldron of water when it wasn't in use because it burned with such intensity. And then we have Nuaida, the silver arm, the first king of this group of gods. Fairness, unwavering dedication to his people. He wielded a sword of light. He upholds fairness and order, balances strength and compassion, symbolizes clarity and sharpness of judgment. He lost his arm and had to step down as the king because it states in their rules that in order to be king, the king must be whole. So Nuaida stepped down willingly, respecting the law and fairness. But Nuaida was crafted an arm, separate story, a magical crafting from a healer god and from the craftsman, much like the cosmic dwarves in Norse mythology, restoring his ability to fight and to also be a leader. And then we have the beautiful Brigid. And I'm just going to leave her for a moment because we're going to discuss her further a little bit later. So moving on, then we have Angus, the young, love, poetry, music, youthful charm, effortless charisma, lighthearted, little bit of a trickster. So this a little low-key energy here I get. His presence brings joy and ease. He has very sharp wit, capable of softening the hardest of hearts. Even in times of strife, love and joy are essential forces, like laughter and the pursuit of beauty and connection. This is what he was trying to teach man. Okay, and then we have the Manannan Mac Lir, son of the sea. Trust, wisdom, navigating the most perils of paths, controlled seasons, like Thor, waves, tides, summoning storms, cloaking armies with his mist, and he was also in charge of transformation and renewal. All right, and now to the healer god we mentioned earlier, Dieites, the god of healing, precision, and expertise. Herbs, magic, and medicine. Not just physical healing, but restoring balance between spiritual, physical, and emotional balance. He could create miraculous remedies such as fix those slain with a magical well of waters that could heal any ailment. Most famously, he assisted with making the silver arm I mentioned earlier for Noida. Now we have Gognu, the divine smith, much like the cosmic dwarfs, who I did mention earlier with the silver arm. Master craftsmanship and creation made the silver arm, of course, with Theon Sesh. Made unfailing weapons, always found their marks. So like the spear there too. He made unpenetrable shields, but he also made beautiful things as well, crafting jewelry. And he was a keeper of the divine ale of immortality as well. So these are the most prominent in the pantheon, although there are more. Now, where did they live? The other world is what that was called, and it was made up of 4 cities. Again, visuals might help. Sorry, I don't have the video. Social media linked below. All right. So, the 4 cities. Now, Danu and Bele did not create them. So this realm apparently sits parallel to ours. The gods and goddesses would spend years here learning and honing their skills. So there was Thalius, the city of wisdom and spiritual knowledge. So Morfessa, who was a druid priestess, taught the pantheon of gods the understanding of the natural world, its cycles. It's the home of the Stone of Destiny, Lilafile, which symbolized justice and the divine right to rule, ensuring leadership would always align with the balance of the land. So it was a sacred artifact that apparently would cry out under the foot of the rightful king, therefore aligning the rightful leader. All right. And then we have Gorias, the city of strength and strategy, discipline and foresight. So here, the pantheon learned the art of war and leadership. Ezra's was the sage and the guide. And from Gorias comes that sword of Noida that we talked about there. Then the 3rd city is Morias, abundance and nourishment. They learned healing, creation, and sustenance, and it was ruled by Semius. From this area, we got the cauldron of Dagda that never runs out of sustenance. Then, lastly, we have Findius, skill and precision. They learned craftsmanship, artistry, mastery over their tools. The sage here was Wushius, and he instilled the importance of focus and excellence. And from here came the sphere of Lug. Okay, so the sphere that never missed its mark. So, the gods and goddesses descended upon Ireland in a great misty cloud when they were done all their learning that spread across the land. The first mortals were already there. The Firbolg, strong and proud, they'd already cultivated the land, saw the gods' arrival as a threat instead of a blessing. So, the gods and goddesses thought they were the rightful owners of the land, and the tension was inevitable. Wars happened, the Magtwirk battles, then the Milesians, mortal ancestors of the Irish people, arrived and forced the pantheon to retreat to the other world, where the Tuatha De Danann, the pantheon, became eternal guardians of the land from the other world. Okay, so talked a little bit about the druids. Gonna talk about them a bit more now. So mentioned. They didn't write anything down. Problematic for historical record. So a lot of the stuff that we find was put down, written down, scribed down by Christian monks. And as we have discussed previously, they like to propagandize stories to discredit any pagan figures. Now, due to the timing of their existence, it's still kind of highly debatable. The Greeks mention them around 200 BC. Now, druid is a word of debated origin, but it's commonly accepted as meaning wise or oak wise. So the oak tree sacred to them. The druids, the history has them ending in Britain around the 1st century. So the Romans eradicated them, the last of them at the Isle of Anglesey. Scotland and Ireland, they existed much longer, into the 5th and 6th centuries, until, again, Christianity arrived and wiped them out. I am going to talk a little about St. Patrick's Day here. And this is also where things get really frustrating for me. All right, because as most of you know, my regular listeners, my ancestry is Norse pagan. That's my mother's side, and that's the one I have explored and traced back the most. The ones I know the most about, the history of, the names of, gone far, 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 far back. My dad's side has Irish and Scottish. So this is where like ancestors killing ancestors and one set of ancestors trying to get the other set of ancestors to convert to something terrible. History. Don't you love it? All right, gonna get into it. Okay, so we also ask for Brigid on St. Patrick's Day, or as we call it in the pagan community, All Snakes Day. We call it Blessed All Snakes Day. So if you don't know what All Snakes Day is, you should just know that St. Patrick's Day, much like everything else, Christians changed stuff, made themselves heroes. Oh. Anyways, St. Patrick was not his name, okay? That wasn't his name. And he wasn't even Irish. He was from Denmark, and the guy was sort of a douchebag, all right? I know he's also the patron saint of many other countries, but those quote-unquote snakes that he drove out of Ireland and saved the country from were witches, pagans, druids, like actual humans, like I've been talking about, that had different beliefs than him. And instead of trying to bridge the gap and practice peacefully together, Christians either murdered or banished those who had different beliefs than them, and then propagandized a lot of the text to discredit the deities. He used the shamrock to symbolize the Christian Holy Trinity. So, just letting you know, wearing it basically represents wearing the cross. Nothing wrong with that, obviously, but not sure how many people would be comfortable wearing it if they knew that that's what it stood for. So, these are all based on legend, of course. Did he single-handedly drive out all the pagans? Probably not. Is this what Christianity has popularized and claimed for him, making him a hero? Definitely yes. So, celebrating St. Patrick's Day is therefore commemorating the life of this douchebag and giving thanks to God for imploring him to intercede on his behalf and killing a bunch of people who didn't believe the same thing he did. So that's why a lot of pagan people wear the sign of the snake on All Snakes Day. Now, I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad or anything like that. If you didn't know this information and I'm telling it to you now, cool. Because, like, I did it for years too. I'd go out on All Snakes Day and have a green beer with friendly strangers and, party it up. But the more you know about what you're really celebrating, and now you have the information. All right, back to the druids, who were the ones mostly driven out. So where were they from? Across Central, Western, and Northern Europe. Possibly ancient sites, maybe still there, that weren't destroyed by the Romans and Christians. But when they took over, they got rid of the trees and everything. Like, remember how I mentioned that oak trees were sacred to the druids? So they got rid of those trees with markings carved into them and all that. So that you won't find those trees that are, that old. No way. Mm-mm. There is a sacred well staircase in Scotland that is sacred to them. Water and moving water was very, very sacred to the druids. So water sources, rivers, things like that. You would often find artifacts there because they would throw things in as an offering. Also, waters and moving waters were portals in that belief system. So Julius Caesar wrote that the druids were very educated, had schools and networks. They were chosen from a young age and trained from a young age up until about 20. So popular imagery shows druids as robed, bearded men, like around Stonehenge. Okay, white robes during rituals, very clean. They were very well groomed. And although most imagery depicts men, surprise, surprise, because back then all the pen holders were men. There were also priestesses. And famously, the goddess Brigid herself is said to have been a druid priestess, or Saint Brigid, or Brigid. Okay. But not according to the legend of, Saint Brigid in Christianity. Vomit. Sorry. So as suggested by the Romans and what was written by them, there were 3 types of druids, okay? And it was lightly mentioned. Vates, kind of prophets or seers, bards, singers or artists, and druids, the philosophers, okay? Also like politicians. They were seen as higher in standing than even the leaders, earls, kings, and chiefs. Any major decision was advised on by the druids. They were also the medicine people, the healers, the philosophers, the astrologers, politicians, advisors. Something I need to mention, Stonehenge, not built by the druids. The timing does not line up at all. Propaganda story of Romans seeing them climbing trees, cutting mistletoe with golden shears and catching it in a white cloth, and then sacrificing humans and animals. Oh my goodness. I'm just going to comment on that. From what I understand about who the druids were as people, I would think that they had evolved to a consciousness level where they were not doing that. Okay? I don't believe that was practiced as often as they say it was in Norse paganism either. Anyways, the druids oversaw the seasonal changes, especially Beltane and Samhain, Halloween, the fire festivals. They were obsessed with divination, astrology. They also oversaw rituals like marriage, births, deaths, etc. Highly, highly respected individuals in the community. All right? So, now we are going to talk about the beautiful, beautiful Brigid. Now, I was thinking of doing an episode on Brigid back in February when it was in bulk, but I thought I would wait because I wanted to kind of wrap all of this up together with a little bow. Anyways, so again, her sacred day, the feast of Saint Brigid, January 31st, February 1st, depending on the text you read. Brigid, translated, is the exalted one. So the neat thing about Brigid is she stretches across belief systems, which is really cool. She's revered in paganism, Wicca. She's been a saint for over 1,500 years in Ireland, and goddess representing Ireland itself. So her parents, it was said that the Dagda was her father, but also her lover, Ew, in certain texts. We just leave those ones alone. It's not really clear who her mother was. It doesn't say. She is also listed to have 3 different sisters, all named Brigid, each with different aspects, which is common because it does not seem that there was just one Brigid in history. Looking back, scholars show that Brigid or Brigid also may have been a title given to individuals who were high in spiritual ranking, because it did mean the exalted one, which was linked to her sainting, also being Saint Brigid. So most gods and goddesses have multiple versions in Celtic history. So she's associated with early spring, fire, always fire. Also water, okay, lyrical and calming voice. She is the goddess of Ireland itself. She's the goddess of smithing and crafts, animals in abundance, particularly cows and milk, creativity. She is the goddess of bards, poets, and other creative types, primarily the goddess of druids, because the goddess Brigid is said to be a druid high priestess, but she's also the goddess of war. Okay, again, contrast. Now that story seems to be related to a deity story that came over from Britain. Okay, related deity. Okay, Brigantia, I think that's how you say it, Brigantia. Okay, and she was the goddess of smithing, war. Okay, and again, that was kind of brought over from Britain. But like I said, as we go through these pantheons, you're going to see how a lot of these stories and a lot of these gods and goddesses are quite similar. So Brigid in mythology, she was written about in the Second Battle of Magtweird. So married off to a king named Bress, not well liked, not a good dude. She had a son named Ruden. He was injured in battle, and Brigid introduced a practice of, I think it's called keening, which is a tradition of wailing over the dead in Ireland. In the same story, she's also accredited for inventing a whistle that allowed communication during night travel, which enhanced safety and coordination after nightfall. And then in the book, The Taking of Ireland, she's written about again. Brigid has 2 oxen, so Fia and Femin, and 1 boar, Tortriath. These animals are quite significant to Ireland, and many things are named after them still today. The animals were said to cry in warning if there was plundering taking place on any of the shores by any Vikings. Oops, sorry. Brigid was also known as Saint Brigid in religious texts, who performed miracles and healing. She was kind and generous, especially to lepers. The other story of Brigid the Saint is the miracle of the cloak. Brigid, seeking land to build her convent, prison. Oh, that's funny. Spell check is hilarious sometimes. My notes. Okay. Anyways, to build her convent for her nuns, she approached the king of Leinster, and he jokingly responded to her, "I'll give you as much land as your cloak can cover." Then her cloak magically expanded over a very, very vast and large area, and the king had to be true to his word and give it to her, and it led to the monastery dedicated to her being built in Leinster. So another story that kind of makes me laugh is that Brigid can also transform water into beer. So another miracle in Ireland. Anyways, there's other stories of Brigid's miraculous healing. In one, there was a set of twins that were mute, and the blood from her head made them not mute anymore. Okay, not sure why she took it from her head. I don't know. All right. So many others with her connection to women, nuns, also for advocating for women's rights. She's known for feminism, and she's now a feminist icon in Ireland and internationally. So Brigid, goddess versus saint, how are they the same? This is still highly debated today between people who worship her as a goddess or people who worship her from a religious standpoint and visit the well that is sacred to her and her sacred waters. It's still healing, right? It's still connection. So who cares? Anyways, the story of the eternal flame, pagan, was adopted by religion, and there was a flame kept at the main church in Leinster, Kildare, maintained by a group of nuns called the Brigidine Sisters. I think there was 19 of them. The flame was, however, extinguished in the 16th century and relit in 1993. Cool. When it became cool again. But again, that whole like religion versus pagan thing. Yeah. Anyways, that's what happened and disrupted things. Anyway, if you want to connect with Brigid, all right? Very, very simple. She is a very kind, loving, like I said, she's empowering for women. She's a great goddess to work with. So you are going to want to have fire somewhere, of course, okay? But respectfully, all right? If we're going to have a fire, it's got to be contained. We don't want to be burning anything down, all right? The best offerings for her are poems and stories, milk, cheese, yogurt, butter, candles, of course, flames, right? Incense, grains, gold, iron, blackberries, coins, and herbal tea. So like blackberry herbal tea, or you can mix it up with a couple other things because there's a couple herbs too that I'm going to mention in a minute. So poetry, metal objects, and food offerings are particularly appropriate. Much of Brigid's power boils down to being fruitful, being creative, right? Creating something. Whether that's creatively, physically, or through interactions with the land, regardless of what you choose to offer her, objects or anything like that, she likes something that you've created the best. So, the crystals associated with Brigid, and when I say this, listen, crystals are a New Age thing, all right? They didn't have them back then. Yes, Nordic, they did. They used the sunstone actually for navigation. So they did have a couple, but it's not clear what was used in spiritual practice, all right? So these are just the kind of energies that I get from her, and also from research that other people seem to associate with her as well. So these are the most popular ones. So chiefly connected to metal, though, rather than crystal. So there are several, though, that can help you out. So fire, agate, of course, citrine, carnelian. So any of those fiery ones, okay? Red garnet. Also, any green stones, moss agate or adventurine, hematite or gold nuggets. You could also, for herbs, you could use oak, which sacred to the druids, rowan, willow, blackberry, any grain, rosemary, and early spring flowers. Also basil. So one of the best ways to work with Brigid is to acknowledge her, okay? And acknowledging her on her special day, all right? So it's already passed, but you could do this next year. Put a little note, okay, on Imbolc, you know, just light a little candle for her. Maybe make a corn dolly. She's also associated with those seasonal foods, so you could cook the seasonal food, make an offering to her. You could also work with her during one of the fire festivals. So we have Beltane coming up. May 1st, you could honor her that day as well. Pick some early spring flowers. Put that energy towards your manifestations. Any seeds, you might want to put some little seeds out on a sacred spot for her to represent sowing what you hope to harvest later in the year. Or if you actually are trying to grow something, you know, maybe put your seeds there for blessing for a couple days before you plant them. All right, so it's either literal or metaphorical. You can also acknowledge her at Halloween, Samhain, right? That's the crone aspect of her. We're acknowledging her maiden aspect if you're working with her for Beltane, okay? It's also really good to acknowledge Brigid when you're beginning any creative project, especially one that involves any type of writing or metalwork. And if you have a workspace for these things, you may even want to make a little altar for her. And it doesn't have to be anything large or fancy. Talked about this before. You don't need to have all the stuff, okay? Just whatever is sacred to you. If you're not comfortable doing it, then don't. That's fine too, all right? So just include like a candle, okay? Maybe a little dish of water if you're working with Brigid, okay? Representing her sacred well. And a little bowl for offerings. So like many European deities, much of Brigid's history has been lost through Christianization and cultural suppression. But still, she's a resilient goddess who survives and even flourishes in multiple pantheons today. So work with her when you desire more creativity, more skill, more healing, or abundance in your life. She's a deep well of inspiration, talent, and power. So tap into those healing wells if you feel her energy calling you. Again, accompanying visuals will be displayed on my social media. If you guys would like to book a personal reading with me or a healing service, all my services and pricing are also listed on my social media. You can also email me for more information, which will also be listed below. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you, and I'm so grateful for all of you. And we will see you next time. Until then, keep creating and making your own magic. Stay magical, my friends. Bye.